Hey people!
Hello. I go by the name of Shiv.
And I'm Shay, and this is the Shiv and Shay podcast.
Whoop, whoop. We hope you enjoyed the last episode where we touched on trauma and not invalidating the trauma that you have gone through. But I really enjoyed the last one. Did you enjoy it, Shay?
Definitely did.
To be honest, I've enjoyed every single one of our podcast topics. But if you have any suggestions, please just send them in. You can contact us on Insta, email, YouTube, wherever. So today we're going to be talking on racial justice. But Shay, when you hear the words racial justice, what comes to your head? It can be absolutely anything.
When I think of racial justice, the first person that pops into my mind is very stereotypical, but it's Martin Luther King. And I think what he stood for, how he gathered people together to bring racial justice in the US, but also over here, really plays a part in who we are and how we mix today.
Yeah, I think for me, especially with what's gone on in the last 2 years, finding that the topic racial justice isn't just like a tick box event, like to say, okay, we've covered racial justice, done it now, tick, and that's it. I think there's so much more to it. And I guess that's why we're going to be touching on it today.
Yeah, and today, obviously us talking about it might be a bit boring, but we have a special guest with us today. His name is Ore, so let's welcome Ore to the podcast.
Hey.
He's like, hey, hi there, it's me Ore. So Ore, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? How do we know you? What are you doing here on the podcast?
Cool. So I'm Ore. I am the youth and young adults pastor at City Gates Church, which is how I know Shiv and Shay. You still work with Shay, still work with Shiv.
Yay.
What else did you have?
Like, what do you do aside from church stuff?
Nothing.
Nothing. The computer.
Nothing. Well, I mean, there's so much more to you, Ore. Like, I know you're the youth pastor and you do young adults, but also, like, you know, you're very passionate about, I think, music as well. You sing. He's an avid singer. He's going to sing for us today, guys.
No, I'm retired.
He's retired. And he plays, like, every instrument under the sun. But generally speaking, like, Ore is fantastic. I know he says that he met me through City Gates, but I actually knew Ore beforehand. I think you've forgotten. So I think we first met, I don't know, in Newcastle? Not in Newcastle. After Newcastle.
It was in London.
In London, but I met Amy, your wife, beforehand. But met Ore before everybody else. But Ore seems to think that Shay and I only befriended him because we needed someone to fill the gap of youth pastor.
Because it's true.
It wasn't true. You know, Shiv's actual real reason of going to meet you is because she knew that you was getting married to Amy. She was like, who's this guy marrying my friend's friend? Or my friend. So
my friend's friend.
Yeah. So that's why we spoke to you. And also we just wanted to get to know you because we're a part of the Elam family.
Oh, okay.
So youth workers together, you know?
Right. Okay.
Literally.
I believe that once, but...
He said once, but never.
But you're here now. We're friends, you know?
We're friends now. We're real friends now.
We're real friends.
So we're glad to have you on today. So, Ore, what we normally do is we introduce the podcast and then we go into a game. And we want to play a bit of a different game this time. We normally do this or that. And usually it ends with plantain or plantain. Don't answer that. But...
There's only one answer.
Oh, dear. But today we're going to play 21. Shay, how do we play 21?
So, as a child, we all would have played this. It's also called Truth or Dares, but we've got no dares. We're going to just do a forfeit. So, whoever's taking part will count up to 21. Individually, you can only say 3 numbers, so 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. Whoever lands on 21 has to do the forfeit. Now this forfeit is going to be interesting because we are on a podcast, but we may record it so you can actually see it on our Instagram.
Yeah. Okay. So, like Shay said, you can say 3 numbers or you can say less than 3. So you can say 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Okay? Does everyone get it?
4. We do get it.
Yeah. Okay. How do we decide who goes first?
Rock, paper, scissors.
So we're going to do rock, paper and scissors and then we're going to describe because you can't see us. So are you ready? To see who's going to go first.
So it's rock, paper, scissors, shoot.
Okay.
Yeah. Ready?
So shoot is when you go.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
3, 2, 1.
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. So that means Shay's first.
No, I won.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm first.
Okay.
Yeah.
So go Shay, me, Ore. All right, cool. So Shay, over to you. Whoever lands on 21's got a forfeit.
Yes.
No, stop trying to work it out. So guys, what Shay's doing, she's counting. She's trying to count ahead to see if she will land on 21. Come on. Just come on.
1, 2, 3,
4, 5,
6,
7,
8.
9, 10.
11, 12, 13.
14.
You're an idiot.
15.
16, 17, 18.
19.
20.
You're actually out of order. You're actually out of order. 21.
Say it. Okay, so the
21.
lovely Shay has got 21.
Pause. Did you not plan this?
No.
I feel like you did.
No, it's fine. Don't be a sore loser. So Shay has got a forfeit. If you guys can think of what the forfeit will be, I think that'll be interesting. And we'll record it live and we'll post it up on the Instagram.
I'm allergic to nuts. And
She's
I'm also
allergic to nuts.
lactose intolerant.
And
so
she's lactose
no
intolerant.
cheese, no nuts. You're out of order. I really feel like you planned this.
No.
Alright, cool. So getting into today's topic. Alright. On the topic of race, racism, prejudice, that kind of stuff, can you tell us a bit about your experience growing up? Because obviously, these lot might not know, but you didn't grow up in London. So can you tell us a bit about like your experience? What was primary, secondary school like?
Yeah, so I grew up in a place called Stoke-on-Trent, which is like somewhere between Manchester and Birmingham, like an hour either side. It's just not a very diverse city. Like I grew up going to a school that was predominantly white, but had a lot of Asian people. So we had some shared experiences there. But then when I was about 7, moved to a school where I was literally the only person of colour in the whole school. And I obviously had experiences of racism before moving schools. But when I moved to that school, then that's when, it just became a lot more frequent. And I guess it was just intensified, I guess. So, for example, when I moved school, it was like 2-form entry. And my class, they wouldn't let me play football with them because, quote, my skin looked like poo. So I had to play football with the other class. But even then it was, it's still just that kind of sense of rejection. And I was talking to you guys earlier about just stuff like teachers would often say to me things like, oh, like you're really clever. They'd say I was really clever, but like it just took me like such a long time to get work done. But like looking back on it now, I kind of question no wonder it took me so long to get work done, because I was dealing with so much racial trauma whilst just like, and it wasn't being addressed or dealt with, and then I'm just having to like get on with schoolwork as normal. And then even going into secondary school, again, like secondary school was a little better because I wasn't the only person of colour, but for a long time I was the only black person. And so it just wasn't easy. Just a lot of racial trauma. Even sometimes from teachers as well, microaggressions from teachers, and then when it gets reported, then the people you report it to are like questioning, like, oh, are you sure that's what really happened? Because this is a really serious thing to say. And then, like, again, just looking back, like, why was I in the bottom set for English, but came out with a B in GCSE? Like, why was I not in the top set for maths, but came out with an A star? Like, just different things like that. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot I could say. Like we could be here for hours talking about some of the stuff. But I guess that just gives it a little bit of an idea.
Thank you for like sharing and just giving context as well, because like, I think for Shay and I, obviously growing up in London, our experience of primary school and secondary school would be very different to yours. I know Shay and I went to different schools, but the school that I went to, I was surrounded by people of all different races. So I grew up in a very like multicultural environment, so we didn't really experience the same sort of, well, didn't experience the same things that you went through. And that's not to say I didn't experience racism, but the way I think it was addressed was very different. So where you shared about, you know, a teacher kind of saying, "Are you sure that's what was said? Because this is very serious." In my primary school, any encounter that I had that felt racist, or I felt like I was being, you know, treated differently, the teacher would take my side essentially. And I don't know if Shay, if you've had any sort of experiences in school or college or wherever of like racism at all.
Not so much in school. When I was a teenager, I lived in Chimford on an all-white estate, and there were, on my estate, there was only 5 black families. So there was racism, like people calling me the N-word and you guys are different. There was a lot of segregation, and I just think for me, it was just a part of life. There wasn't anything like, you just adapt to your situation as opposed to this affected me. I didn't really think about it. I think we noticed growing up, the time that we noticed the differences between cultures, quote unquote, was when we read Of Mice and Men. And there's obviously in the book, because of the time, there's the N-word and stuff like that. And that's when our class separated. And also when we watched Roots in year 8, it was the same sort of thing where we was like, oh, we're black, we must stick together, they're white, they stick together. But that's really it. Nothing was really come of that, if that makes sense.
And that's quite, that to me is quite eye-opening, like what you shared, Ore, and what Shay shared, and like my own experiences, because similarly to you, Ore, my husband Dwayne grew up in like Bedfordshire, and they were like proper in the village. Like when I go up there, it's amazing. It's nice to be there. Feel like I'm outside of London. It's wonderful. But yeah, I'm outside of London. It's beautiful. It's nice. It's nice to be around all these people that don't look like me. But he went to a school and he was the only black child there. And then, you know, for a number of years until his sister came, and he experienced racism as well. So coming and moving into London, the experience was totally different, especially coming into a church like City Gates, where you look left and you look right and there's someone who looks like you. In fact, you can sit in a service and find out that your cousin's there, which literally happened to Dwayne. Dwayne literally came here from Luton and he looked up and was like, oh my gosh, that's my cousin. And his cousin comes to this church. But I wanted to ask Ore, like, compared to life in sort of Stoke-on-Trent and being in London, have you experienced any like racism at all? Anything that kind of reminds you of what you went through as a child?
I actually can't think of a time I've experienced racism since moving here. Like, I have like online and stuff, but in terms of like people, like in like face to face, like I can't even really think of a time where there's been like a microaggression or anything, and that's not to say, obviously not to say there's no racism in London, but I think it's now, I think because obviously working in a church that's predominantly black, I spend a lot of my time either with black people or with people who are culturally aware if they're not black. So I maybe I have just without realizing it, but I can't think of a time when I have since moving here. Maybe it's even just like comparatively from I don't know, but I can't think of a time.
It could be different, isn't it? Yeah. Because what sometimes you hear people say, like overt racism and covert, that's the other word, isn't it? Covert racism. So sometimes the racism is very much in your face, being called, you know, a derogatory term, and other times it's actually their person's actions, or you know, crossing the road when they see you, or saying, oh, I didn't know your kind did that, you know what I mean? Like things like that. So
like I just never, I mean, there's been times, like, I still, for example, like, there was a time when, like, recently, like, late at night, my wife Amy and I, we went out. She went to the corner shop to grab some stuff, and I went to pick us up some hot chocolates. And I, like, was waiting for her, like, just to come out of the shop. But I was, like, standing in the street, and I had my hood up as well, and I was wearing a cap. And I, like, just all of a sudden just felt, like, really anxious, like, I don't know what people are going to think, a black guy. But that was more my own anxiety based off racial trauma, as opposed to actually experiencing the microaggression of someone, like, crossing the road or like asking me what I'm doing there or anything like that.
I think that's really interesting, because a lot of the times when we talk about racial justice, we always talk about what other people do and perceptions, but sometimes we never look at our own prejudice and so on and so forth. And I think it's interesting because quite often, I think, especially in the world that we work in, and the people that we mix, we do a lot of code switch, and then we're always have to be aware of, is what I'm wearing reflecting something that's negative, or how I'm speaking, does it portray something? And it's just a random thought. But let me ask you a question. You mentioned, as you were sharing your story earlier, that you was the only black child or person of colour in your primary school and secondary school for a period of time. How did that shape you?
I don't know if being the only black person or person of colour in and of itself shaped me. I think it's more the racial trauma that came with that. Like, I feel like if I had been the only black person, only person of colour, and not experienced any racism, maybe it would have. I'm not sure it would have to the same extent. Just like some obvious things, like there was a period of time when I was in primary school where I remember wishing that I wasn't black. Like, I desperately wanted not to be black. Like, I just desperately wanted to be white, because most of my experience outside of the home of being a black person was that black is bad. Like, it's a negative thing. Like, it wasn't, like, didn't matter, like, how good I was at school, didn't matter how well I behaved, didn't matter how well I performed academically. It was just constantly being reinforced that black is bad, that black is worthless, that it's undesirable, that it's not something that we want to be around. And so just desperately wanted not to be black. That's not the case anymore, thankfully. Thankfully that wasn't a long-lived period of time. But I think that has kind of, I guess, even to some extent to this day, I have to kind of be aware of things like people pleasing or wanting to prove myself, or those kinds of things, and I guess part of that is a result of that experience from school. But other than that, I think on the flip side, one positive that's come out of that is that I think that I don't know how else to word it other than being able to say I think I can walk in both worlds. Like, I think I can relate to black British culture, relate to African culture, particularly Nigerian Yoruba culture, but also, like, can relate to the white community as well. Like, even there was something that came up recently where something was said publicly, and it just was not good or helpful in terms of bringing racial reconciliation and unity. And the way a lot of people reacted was quite like, oh, how can that person say what they said, and or that kind of thing, and it's completely get where they're coming from, because it was wild. What was said was wild. Like, what is going through your mind to say that? But actually, on the flip side of that, like, I kind of understand like the way people can be conditioned to think just by their environment and things like that. I can understand how someone can come to a conclusion why they would think that's okay. It's not okay, but I can understand how he got there and understand actually there's a need for education there as opposed to kind of punishment or something like that. What needs to happen is you need to unlearn all of those unhelpful things. And I think being in that environment where like I'm not like I really am a minority, as opposed to having loads of people who look like me and share my experiences, like being in that space I think has helped me to be able to kind of walk in both worlds and actually like in more recent years have quite a lot of conversations with white people about this stuff, and just really help them to understand like how we got to this point, and what needs to happen for us to move forward in a helpful direction.
That's solid. Thank you for sharing. Like, I just want to touch on something that you shared about that experience you had when you were younger, where you were saying like you didn't like the colour of your skin and you wanted it to be white. Like, I feel like growing up black in our generation, maybe loads of people have I for one have definitely experienced that. Like, all my dolls were white and they had straight hair, and then so when like Bratz dolls came out, some of you guys might not know about Bratz dolls, but when Bratz dolls came out, they had big lips and voluptuous bodies, you know. But then they had straight hair still. So I remember saying to my mum, like, I want to look like this, I want to look like that. But then it was when I got to around 10, that's when I started to kind of learn to love the skin I was in, not completely, because I was like, right, this is how I look. I can't change this, but I want my hair to be straight like this one. And then going through the whole like learning to love your hair type thing, going through relaxers did not agree with me, so I was pretty much bald from year 7 to year 9. So I think that's very much part of the black experience growing up, wherever you're in London or wherever you're up north. We've all had that sort of identity crisis, and we felt like we wanted to be someone else. But I guess the way of the world now, we're now celebrating, you know, black is beautiful, doesn't matter what shade of black you are, doesn't matter how much melanin you have, just learning to love and accept who you are. So yeah, thank you for sharing. And I guess also I would love to, you know, find out a little bit more about, you know, you as a married man in a interracial relationship, you know, what has that looked like in the time you've been married? Like, tell us a little bit about like Amy, and then also if you can talk to me about like in the last 2 years, 2020, with what's gone on with, you know, George Floyd and, you know, just police brutality, what it's looked like in an interracial relationship, navigating through racial injustice.
To be fair, I think to be able to speak honestly about our relationship, I probably have to go back before we're married. So when we're like dating in a relationship, and I guess the first thing to say is, as you guys know, you know Amy. She's amazing. If you're listening, Amy, shout out to you.
Loving you is easy 'cause you're beautiful.
But yeah, like to begin with, it wasn't like easy because, to be fair, not a lot of stuff, but just stuff I kind of had to talk through. But Amy was and is just really good at just listening and like just being open to learning. And I think that's been key, really. Like she's just been kind of like, do you know what, like I don't get this, I don't get your experience, I've not been through it, and so like I'm willing to listen, willing to learn. And I think that's been key. Like I was talking to some guys the other week, and they were asking me about this, and I basically said the same thing, and then they were like, oh, so she's an ally. I was like, well, she has to be.
You got no choice.
She's got no choice.
She's married to you.
Yeah. So, but no. On a real though, she's actually great. Like to the point where like I don't have to go to her and be like, oh, that thing that you're telling me was said at work is not okay. Like she's coming back and saying this was said at work and I challenged it. And that kind of thing. And so, and then even like with the whole George Floyd thing, that was an emotional time.
Yeah.
But she was just really supportive in that, like,
Definitely.
just like not pushing me to talk, but when I needed to talk, she was there to listen. She's just Amy. She's great.
So, she is great.
I love that. No, she is. And even thinking back to that period, actually, obviously us as black people, we had a shared experience, but actually having friends like Amy who would sit down and be like, are you okay, Shay? This isn't right, and asking the right questions. And I think for us as Christians as well as black people, it's the first time our voice was, for me, really felt heard. And yeah, I think she was just great in that.
Definitely.
I've got a question. We've spoken a lot about our experience, well, your experience and stuff like that, but we're all Christians. What does the Bible say about race? Do you have anything to share about that?
I have a lot to share about that.
Come on, Pastor.
Yes. Take notes, honestly, guys.
So I guess this is a journey that I feel like I'm still on. When the whole George Floyd's murder and all of that happened, I think, like most people, my response was completely emotional because just the scale of it just brought back every emotion, like racial trauma, like right back to the surface. And so it was like, it was just stressful and emotional, and I was responding out of that. Like, I even remember like posting things on social media, like being like, oh, you guys, you're not talking about this enough, but it was all out of emotion. And so I got to the point where I was like, do you know what, I want to know what God has to say about this, but more than this, because what I don't want is just these random Bible verses about justice and then being like, see, God cares about justice. Like, what does the gospel have to do with this? What does the cross of Jesus have to do with this issue? And so what I discovered was that the gospel actually answers like all of the questions about racial justice. It tells us what racial justice is, or what racial injustice is. It tells us why racial injustice is wrong, why it exists, what the solution is, what we should do about it, and what hope we have for the future as well. And so, and what I mean by the gospel, so the gospel, of course, is that Jesus died on the cross and rose again to save sinners, so that we can have forgiveness if we repent of our sin and put our faith in Jesus, that we're saved. But the thing is, that is the gospel. But when the apostles were preaching that gospel, that just about the death and resurrection of Jesus, they're preaching it to people who have context for the death and resurrection of Jesus. And so the context for the death and resurrection of Jesus, to get that, we actually need to know the full story of the Bible. We need to start in Genesis. We need to see the gospel as this, not this just a set of facts or beliefs, but a story that begins in Genesis and ends in Revelation that we're invited to join in with.
Yeah, that's good.
And when we look at the gospel that way, that's when it gives us all the answers for racial justice. So I'll try and keep this as short as possible, because there's actually so much that could be said.
It's all good.
But we're told in the beginning, the first sentence of the Bible, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Right? That tells us so much about God. Most importantly, that one, not only is he the creator, but because he's the creator, he is the true and rightful ruler and king over all of creation. And as the rightful ruler and king over all of creation, he chooses to make human beings in his image. Genesis 1:26 to 27. And that has a whole load of connotations, but for the purposes of speaking on racial justice, if all human beings are made in the image of God, that means all human beings are inherently worthy of dignity. So regardless of gender, of sexuality, of social class, of whether you're able-bodied or you have a disability, regardless of your ethnicity or your race, all human beings are inherently worthy of dignity.
That's right.
And so to strip a human being of their dignity is offensive to God. It's an offense against God and should be offensive to us. So that's why racial injustice is wrong, because it racism strips human beings made in the image of God of their dignity. And I've had a little bit of pushback on that. Like, people say that I'm overcomplicating things, and that it's like we should just say racism is hate and just keep it at that. But the problem is, right, you guys have had random people just touch your hair, right?
Oh, don't touch my hair.
Exactly.
Sorry.
Exactly. So I don't know a single person who has ever touched my hair because they hate me.
Oh.
I just don't. Like, most people, it's the opposite. They touch my hair not because they hate me, but because they feel like they love me. At worst, they're curious, but they don't hate. But to touch my hair without my permission is to treat me like an animal or an object, and to strip me of my dignity, which is an offense against God, because I'm a human being made in the image of God.
That's deep.
Right? Wow. So that's that just that alone, human beings being made in the image of God, it gives us a definition for racial injustice, and it gives us a reason for why it's wrong. But why does it exist? Yes, white supremacy, but why does white supremacy exist? If God is the rightful ruler of all of creation, and human beings, he as the rightful ruler has made human beings in his image, then how can racism exist? Well, it's because in Genesis 3 we're told that humanity rebelled against God as the rightful ruler of all of creation, turned away from him, and chose to go their own way. And that's what the Bible calls sin. Sin separates us from God, and it separates us from, it damages our relationships with each other. And that's why racial injustice, or that's why any injustice exists. Yes, white supremacy, and we have to address white supremacy. It has to be addressed. But if we address white supremacy without addressing the issue of sin, then racism will never be dealt with.
Yeah, that's right.
So I just want to read this passage from Isaiah 59. Let me read from verse 12 to the first half of 14. It says, Isaiah the prophet says this: "For our offences are many in your sight, and our sins testify against us. Our offences are ever with us, and we acknowledge our iniquities. Rebellion and treachery against the Lord, turning our backs on our God, inciting revolt and oppression, uttering lies our hearts have conceived. So justice is driven back, and righteousness stands at a distance." And so what Isaiah is saying here is that because we've turned away from God, there's no justice. It's because humanity has turned away from God that racial injustice exists. So yes, we have to address white supremacy, but we first have to deal with sin. And sin is the reason why no human idea or ideology, no human intentions or goodwill will ever deal with racial injustice, because the Bible tells us that all of us have sinned. Everyone is guilty of sin, and so any human idea or anything like that is too easily corrupted by sin to do any good, which means we actually need someone or something to come and deal with sin before racial injustice can be dealt with. And that's where Jesus comes in. Before we talk about how Jesus deals with injustice, we first have to define what is justice. What are we talking about when we're fighting for justice, when we're saying no justice, no peace? What do we mean by justice? Because there are actually lots of different types of justice. For example, meritocratic justice. That's a justice that says you get what you deserve. So, for example, if after recording this podcast I was to go and rob a bank, meritocratic justice would be I would go to prison. I get what I deserve. If you were to work all week and then your boss decides actually you're not going to get paid, that's injustice,
Yeah.
because you deserve to be paid for the work that you've done. So that's meritocratic justice. Then there's distributive justice. This is the idea that of equal distribution of resources like wealth or power or opportunities or healthcare, different things like that. Or there's libertarian justice, which is the idea of having free will, like my individual freedom needs to be protected. So, for example, when France tried to ban the hijab, according to libertarian justice, that would be unjust. The problem is that's only 3 types of justice, right? There's more, but the problem is often when it's time to carry out justice, the different types of justice, they clash. They can't happen simultaneously. So when that happens, what you have to decide is, what's the priority? Which type of justice is the priority? For Jesus, the priority is something called restorative justice, which is where relationships and dignity are restored through reparations. Relationships and dignity are restored through reparations. And you see that throughout all of his life and his teaching. So he goes around and restores dignity to people who've been stripped of it by society. He eats and drinks with sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes who've all been disregarded by society. He heals lepers by touching them when the society says, actually, they're not human enough for us to touch. Right? He calls those with privilege and power to use it to benefit those who've been stripped of dignity by society. When he's at this like banquet with some Pharisees who are like the religious elite of the time, and he says, when you throw a banquet, when you have a dinner party, don't invite your friends and your family who are going to invite you back. Invite the lame and the poor and the crippled and the beggars who won't be able to repay you. In other words, don't even just donate to them. Like, restore relationship that society has stripped from them. Restore dignity that society has stripped from them by having dinner with them. Even Zacchaeus, he transforms Zacchaeus's life. And Zacchaeus is a tax collector who spent his life being completely unjust, taking more money from people than he should. And what does he do? When Jesus transforms his life, Zacchaeus performs restorative justice. He's like, I'm going to restore relationships by giving back 4 times as much as I've taken. Jesus teaches he teaches us to forgive those who've hurt us. He teaches to love our enemies. All of this is restorative justice. But Jesus doesn't just teach about restorative justice. He executes the ultimate act of restorative justice on the cross.
That's it.
So the sin that we spoke about, that's the root of all of this racial injustice. It doesn't just separate us from God, but the Bible tells us that actually we deserve death because of it. Like, meritocratic justice says we deserve the wrath and judgment of God, resulting in death. But Jesus doesn't leave us to that fate. Instead, he makes reparations on our behalf through the cross, dying the death that we should have died, taking upon himself the wrath and judgment of God. And he restores our dignity by taking us out of the dominion of darkness and bringing us into the kingdom of light. He restores our relationship with God. Restorative justice. But if you read Ephesians chapter 2, the restorative justice that Jesus performs isn't just between us and God, but it's between people groups as well. We're told that Jesus has removed the dividing wall of hostility that's between Jews and Gentiles, but it's actually, in the passage, it's between Jews and Gentiles, but it's actually between all people groups. And so, actually, if you read Ephesians 2, it actually gives a really good description of how Jesus does first restorative justice between us and God, and then between the people groups. And so, through the cross, Jesus has executed the ultimate act of restorative justice. And for those of us who've put our faith in Jesus, who've repented of our sin, put our faith in him and chosen to follow him, he invites us to join him in his work of restorative justice. Beyond racial injustice, it's gender equality, that's just making sure people are treated like human beings made in the image of God. And this is the kingdom that he is building for himself, where all the walls that have all the barriers that are placed in our society to tear them down. That yes, like we should celebrate our blackness, we should celebrate our ethnicity, but actually when our faith in Jesus, we can do that. We can celebrate our ethnicity whilst actually being brothers and sisters with our brothers and sisters from Europe, from Asia, from South America, from everywhere, because Jesus has removed the dividing wall of hostility. And if you try to fight racial injustice even once, you'll have experienced that actually sometimes a lot of the time it's long and it's exhausting, and it feels like sometimes nothing's ever going to change. But here's the hope that we have if we're followers of Jesus, that Jesus is coming back, and he's going to make all things new, all things right, and restore all things. And we're given a picture of what his kingdom will look like when he restores all things. In Revelation chapter 7 verse 9, we're told, John, who writes the book of Revelation, sees this vision of God's people, the people who are following the Lamb, the army of the Lamb, and he says that they are people from every tribe, people, tongue, nation.
You want me to read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Come on, I've got it up already.
Go ahead.
So Revelation 7:9, the great multitude in white robes. After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands.
And that right there is racial justice. That right there is racial equality. It's coming. It's coming. And that's not to say that we should just sit back and wait for Jesus to come, because he's inviting us into action now. But what that does mean is that as we fight, like, we're not just like, oh, like if we don't do this perfectly, it's all gonna fail. Like, Jesus has already executed justice on the cross.
That's right.
He's inviting us to join him, not in a losing battle, but in a battle that's already won. And so that's our hope as we fight for racial justice, that it's coming. Jesus will bring it when he brings the kingdom in all of its fullness.
Amazing.
And that's what the gospel has to say about racial justice.
Do you know what I love about this whole thing? Actually, the things that you won't see is actually Ore was not reading from notes, but this was purely from his heart and research, and I think that's really amazing. And you just captivated me. Like, I want to know more and I want to research more.
Definitely.
So please send me, some podcasts.
Honestly, Ore, we're so grateful for you sharing that, and it's definitely something like, there's a reason why so many people have asked you to speak on it, because it's not only your own experiences, but actually your knowledge of the word and the understanding of racial justice and what the gospel has to say about that. I will attach all of the scriptures that you've shared, and I love the fact that some of the scriptures you shared I already had on my notes, so that is just God moving there. But do you have any like book recommendations or like anything that you can share that that you'd recommend? And I've got a few as well that I can share.
Yeah, cool. I guess a go-to for anyone who I guess this is more for if you want to start thinking about what racial justice and racial equality could look like in your church. Two really good books. One is We Need to Talk About Race by Ben Lindsay. You probably have heard of it. A lot of people are reading it, and it's because it's a really good book. But even if you're a person of colour, I found it like a really helpful book as well, and it has like, depending on like where you find yourself, whether you're white, whether you're a person of color, whether you're a church leader, whether you're just a member of the congregation, even if you're not a person of faith. It's got some questions for you to kind of think about after each chapter as well, depending on where you're at. So that, I think that's a really helpful book. Another one in terms of thinking through racial justice in the church is Crossing the Divide. I forget who it's by. You found
Crossing the Divide by Owen Hilton?
Yes, by Owen Hilton. That is just another really helpful book in terms of just looking at what does diversity and inclusion look like in the church. Those are two really helpful books. And if you want to look at when I was talking before, I mentioned how we have to deal with sin before we deal with white supremacy, but we do have to deal with white supremacy. A helpful book for starting to look at that, because I think one of the keys to dealing with white supremacy is having an honest look at history. And so a helpful book for that is The Whitewashing of Christianity by Jerome Gay. That's a really helpful book in terms of just looking at how white supremacy has used the Christian faith as a tool, and how we can, I guess, kind of just undo that, and just have an honest look at the history so that we can address white supremacy properly. Good recommendations.
As most people know, I work with kids, so I've got great kids resources, and for young people as well. So one's called The Image of God by Andrew McDonough. So it's like a children's book, but it basically speaks about how we are created in the image of God. And one thing I love about this is that the cartoons, they are black. So it's nice. I know if I had this book growing up, it would be great to see, a Christian resource with people who look like me. And I've got loads at home as well. So all my godchildren will be able to come over and see that they are created in the image of God. Another one is God's Very Good Idea, speaking about identity, and that's by Trillia Newbell. Another one is You Are Extraordinary, by Craig and Samantha Johnson. And then this one, which is amazing, this kind of came about in 2020, is called The Gospel in Colour. And this is by Curtis Woods and Jarvis J. Williams. And I guess this resource kind of provides a biblical lens of, race, racism, and racial reconciliation. And so there's actually a version for young people to read, and a adult one for you to do a devotional with your child or youth group. So those are my recommendations.
You said the books that I was going to say.
Of course.
There was only 3 books. So read, guys. So Ore, thank you so much for just what you've done. We like to end our podcast with prayer. So would you like to pray for our listeners?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Lord Jesus, we thank you so much for who you are, for all that you've done. Lord, thank you that this issue, racial justice, it matters to you. And thank you that you are the solution. God, I pray that you, even just people listening now, I pray that you would just reveal yourself to us, that we would know you more, but also just empower us, Lord, with your spirit and with your gospel, to just make an impact in the world, Lord, that where we see racial injustice, Lord, I pray that you would help us just to call it out, in ways that glorify you, in ways that bring restorative justice. God, I pray, just for the world right now, Lord, that wherever racial injustice is, would you just begin to shine your light on it, Lord. I pray for anyone right now who is experiencing racial trauma, racial injustice. I pray that you be their peace and their comfort. Thank you that you see all that they're going through and that you're with them. And Lord, I just pray that you would just build your church, Lord, that it would be, we would look more and more like that picture in Revelation 7:9, that people from every tribe and nation and language standing together in unity, celebrating our different cultures and all our differences, and all just bringing glory to you. In Jesus' name,
Amen. All right, thank you so much. It's been a blessing having you on, and thank you guys for listening as well. Like we always say, we're on all major platforms: Spotify, SoundCloud. What's the other one?
Apple Music,
Google Podcast. Do people even use Google Podcast? I mean, anyway, we're on all of those. And our Instagram is @Shiv and Shay Podcast.